Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar this evening. I really appreciate you taking the time and appreciate the commitment to our life together as a diocese, as a family of God. Thank you also for the way in which you have ministered over the last few months. You've reached out to your neighbour, you've connected with the members of your congregations, and there's been some remarkable creative worship, both online and through all sorts of means, such as deliveries into letterboxes. Worship that has kept the priority focus around the way in which we need to always give thanks and praise to God. It's the heart of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It's been a time also where it's been tough on us all, and I know many of us are feeling weary. So please do be kind to yourself. Take time to regroup and to refresh. It's also been a time in which the senior leadership team have gathered each week, both to offer support and to ensure that we were serving the diocese as best we could, but also we have been looking at how we might implement together the vision of the diocese going forward that we set before Synod last year. Now, the next 30 minutes will not be so much about setting out solutions to the many challenges that we know we face as a diocese, or necessarily identifying all the opportunities that are before us, but rather to chart the course that we want to take, because it's a journey that we need to all go on together. And so this is really about setting the direction and encouraging everyone to participate fully in the opportunities that are going to be coming up to help shape the direction, identify the challenges, and to identify the ways forward. So let's just begin with prayer, and then I'll show you the shape of what is to follow, and just remind you about those key priorities that we established at Synod. Let us pray. Loving and most gracious God, we give you thanks for the call that you have placed on our life, for the opportunity to serve you and your people at this time. We give thanks for those on whose shoulders we stand, those who over the 100 years of the life of this diocese have shaped its life and shaped its response to you. May we be worthy inheritors of what they have left us. Open us, loving God, to the leading of your Spirit, that we may follow faithfully in the way of Jesus, the pioneer of our salvation. In your most holy name we pray. So as you can see, the evening or the next half hour is shaped with a contribution from a number of people. Firstly, I will just remind us of those key priorities that we established and were agreed to by Synod last year. And then Ruka, the co-dean of Taranaki Cathedral, will speak a little bit about the importance in his own life and experience of partnership and reconciliation, something which is right in the DNA of the life of this diocese. We've had some remarkable leadership in the life of this diocese that has left us in a place where we have a contribution to make, both to our nation and beyond, but also where there are still significant challenges as we seek to be good partners. Then Dean Wendy Scott and Sue Burns will talk respectively about the challenges and the opportunities and how we're going to try and listen carefully to the leading of God's Spirit in both the urban context, particularly of the city of Hamilton with its rapid growth to the northeast, and as we seek to reinvigorate rural mission and ministry right across the diocese. Stephen will help us to think about the way in which we connect with each other and communicate and those key messages of the gospel that we're called to proclaim. Simon will not only help us think about how we can realign our assets and resources to that mission, but also to introduce you to what we hope will be an exciting way of gathering as Synod this year. And after then, some question and answer, some comment time. Jacqui Paterson, the co-dean at Taranaki Cathedral, will help us conclude in prayer. So these people are well familiar to you. Many of these faces you know well, and some are perhaps newer. Of course, right across the Anglican Communion, we're bound by these 5 marks of mission, these 5 ways of approaching the gospel priorities. The priorities set out in the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain. We are trying to set a pathway for the next 3 years as we look at how we implement, how we move forward together this vision, a vision which is based around seeking to be a family of God, being followers of Christ. We are marked as a people, marked by gratitude, growing as disciples of Jesus and seeking to grow disciples, transforming communities, both the kind of communities that we're part of and being salt and light within the communities in which we're set, that they may be transformed to reflect that kingdom of God of peace and justice and righteousness. We identified at Synod last year 3 key priorities. Firstly, that we would seek to grow our mission across the urban and rural communities in our diocese. Secondly, that we would seek to grow new generations of followers of Jesus and new generation of leaders. And finally, that we would seek to do this by building a collaborative way forward, collaborative leadership, using the gifts of each so that God would be given glory and that all people might flourish. We outlined last synod the particular role that the deans of the cathedral would have. And of course, I said then that the Dean of Waikato, Wendy Scott, would take over as Vicar General from the 1st of July. So welcome to that role, Wendy. We're looking to the deans of the cathedrals to offer leadership in each of the bishoprics and also to represent the bishop. We are a diocese that realistically can only afford 1 bishop now. So the deans will represent me in all sorts of contexts when I can't be in either end of the diocese to represent myself. The archdeacons, with their commitment to a geographical expression of our family within the diocese, will seek to connect and support you and connect and support your relationships with one another, to be a pastor to the pastors, to be a first point of contact for the diocese and for me as your bishop. Now, the process by which we can maintain momentum looks something like this. The vision has been established and it's been supported by Synod. We're identifying these focus areas by which we can implement this vision. There will be people leading in each of these focus areas, and this will be reviewed and looked at month by both bishop staff and standing committee, and we will bring back progress and reports to our synod each year. So this is what it looks like. Our vision, the weave of our commitments to reconciliation and partnership, to growing new generations of followers and leaders, building a sense of community, family and collaboration, communicating clearly and openly with each other, networking ourselves together, being clear about our gospel messages and aligning our resources to those mission priorities and challenges. So it's a real pleasure to introduce Jay Ruka to you. Jay is going to speak out of his own experience of partnership and reconciliation and just describe why this is so important in the life of our diocese going forward. Kia ora, Jay.
E te whānau whānui. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Mai I te whenua o Waikato, ki raro, ki Taranaki ki runga o te ika a Māui. I te whānau whānui o te hahi mihinari, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Hello everybody. Ko Jay Ruka tōku ingoa. My name is Jay, and I am the co-dean, the new co-dean at Taranaki Cathedral. Just as I share briefly tonight, first, let me say thank you to everybody for the incredible work that you have all been doing in perhaps one of the most exceptionally difficult circumstances in many generations. It's been very hard work. And so I just want to thank everyone for your faith and for your service in serving our communities up and down this beautiful coast and the country of our land. As I've approached this discussion tonight, the state of the diocese, the words of Archbishop Huhu Ruka have been on my mind from the 1990 150th celebration of the Treaty of Waitangi. At that service 30 years ago, he said this: 150 years ago, a compact was signed, a covenant was made between two people. But since the signing of that treaty, our partners have marginalized us. You have not honored the treaty. Since 1840, the partner that has been marginalized is me. The language of this land is yours, the custom is yours, the media by which we tell the world who we are yours. Now, that was 30 years ago. As we prepare for the next 3 years, I approach this time, and we as leaders approach this time very much with 2040 in mind. That's 20 years away when we get to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Treaty of Waitangi. So what this next 3 years is about, one of the focuses is to set ourselves on a long-term trajectory to go, how can we as a church truly fulfill that which Archbishop Whakahuihui Virko aspired and dreamed for on behalf of Te Ao Māori. So as we look to engage in these things, this is the direction we're going for. Now, Archbishop Philip has led us as a diocese through an interesting process of taking Meritapu, the Taranaki Cathedral, and submitting it both to Tikanga Pākehā and to Tikanga Māori, to the Waikato and Taranaki Diocese and to Upoko o Te Ika within Tikanga Māori. And that is represented by the fact that Dean Jacqui Paterson and as the Dean amongst Tikanga Pākehā and myself as the Dean in Tikanga Māori are looking to work together to see from the ground up the idea of partnership and reconciliation having true and honest wheels to it. So what we are hoping to do and what we are wanting to do is that the idea of partnership and reconciliation is not a special project for the specialists per se. We want to see right at the muka, right at the heart of the work that we are doing, to see partnership and reconciliation be something that we truly put into practice across everything we do. It's my privilege to talk tonight with my partner, Nita Simmons, with Manawa o Te Wheke, and to see the work that both Nita and Dean Wendy are beginning to engage in the same area within the Waikato region. So to have our two cathedrals in Waikato and our cathedral in Taranaki really come together to see the idea of reconciliation really take off. So Archbishop Philip, back to you. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks very much indeed, Jay. And it does make me think of those generations of people who have dreamed for this kind of partnership and worked for this kind of partnership. It's a real privilege and pleasure to introduce to you someone that you've already begun to know and to love, Wendy Scott, who's been sort of arrived in the diocese, and we instituted you, Wendy, as the Dean of Hamilton Cathedral, and then we went into lockdown. So I'm not sure that we can attribute that to you, but we look forward to what you have to say. Kia ora.
Well, kia ora tātou te whānau, te karaiti nau mai, hara mai. It's really great to be able to join with you today. First of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you to Archbishop Philip and the people of St. Peter's and here in Waikato for calling me as the Dean, and to give me this opportunity of helping lead in this time as we journey together. And it gives me great excitement to see what we've achieved so far, even in the constraints of lockdown. It's been hard work for lots of us, but actually we've worked tirelessly for the life of the gospel and for the life of this diocese. I'm here to look at urban redevelopment. We know that Hamilton is a really large, fast-growing city. There's lots of churches in one place, not in another place. How can we be church across this region and across the city? We know that within our parishes, we've often worked in isolation. This is my parish. This is how I do things. These are my people, my boundary. And we know that we actually can't function that way anymore. And that's why I love so much that opportunity that we are a family. Actually, we're all in this together. We're all facing the same issues. So how we deal with those issues, we're going to do that together. But we can't any longer work in isolation. It's just not going to work for us as we move forward, given the constraints that we have in the world, in an increasingly secular world. We know that if we're really honest, we've got an age bubble. And I can hear some of you saying, yeah, but we've always had the age bubble. We've always had an older group. But if you look at this, the percentage of our people who are in their 70s and 80s, who are still faithful servants, they've been faithful servants all of their lives. We just know that they form the major part of our churches. So what's it going to look like in 20 years? And I know that, you know, if you're in your 80s and you might still be here when you're 100, that's great. Let's do life together then. But actually, we've got some real challenges coming up as we seek to grow leaders from our churches. And we have those missing generations. And we've always had missing generations, but man, we're starting to feel the impact of that. We just know that we're not able to grow leaders for our future because they just aren't there. So we perhaps have to look outside ourselves as we're looking for leaders to take us into the future. I love the idea that we're not just a family who are doing this together, but actually we've set discipleship as a really high priority. All of us have to be growing other disciples, strengthening other people for the journey ahead. If we've got our older kaumatua and kuia, we've got to have them passing the baton on to those younger generations, strengthening them, praying for them, giving them an opportunity to lead and to learn how to run their churches. And as we do that, we should always be focused on God's justice. What are we doing in our communities? How are we serving our communities? How are we making a difference to the people who aren't in our buildings? If we're only worried about the size of our building or what's happening inside our church on a Sunday, then we're not caring for God's creation enough. He always asks us to look outside of ourselves. And so over the next few months, I'm looking forward to getting to know people here in the Waikato as we meet together, and I get to hear your story and the ways that you've faithfully served this city, and together hopefully we come up with God on our side a plan as we seek to move forward. So kia ora tātou, I look forward to meeting you all. Bless you.
Someone who's really well known to you, Sue Burns. She was here in the diocese when I arrived 21 years ago. Served as our ministry educator, then some time working out of St John's College, but still farming here in the Waikato. So kia ora, Sue, thank you so much for joining me in leading and drawing our rural communities together to chart a course for the future.
Kia ora Tefano. Thank you so much, Philip, for inviting me into this space. So what we're going to do this evening is just look at our rural development, and I'm going to look at it under three headings. The first is the land, the second is listening, and the third is the seasons. So let's think about the land. And while I introduce you to this, I'd like you to think of your place, the place of your heart, the place that when you come round that corner in the road and you see whatever it is, your heart lifts and you know that you are home. Have you got it? I have many images in my mind of places around the regions of this diocese which thrill my heart. I remember a night where I saw the moonlight shining on Taranaki on the snow as it glistened as I came round through Moka. There's a particular tree that comes into blossom first of all every springtime, and it's just south of Te Kuiti. There is the katikati, there is the smell of the orchards. Each of these places resonates with us because as we imagine these places, we know that we are called to belong to this land. It is the land of our heart. It is the land of God's heart. And so as we reinvigorate God's mission, we partner with God in these places. So our intention with Bishop Philip, is we've talked about this, is to come around and to listen with you. We trust that God is present in our land, that God is ahead of us, that even though our little communities might appear to be struggling, that out of those communities, God is already present and taking us forward. And so we're going to have some listening time, and I promise you it will be outside carving, it will be after mating. You will not be in the middle of lambing when we arrive. So when we arrive, we will be looking at, who are we? We will look at ourselves. What has God already provided in these places? What is God providing? Are we looking at a Christian presence rather than a denominational presence? How is God already ahead of us? And of course, as we go into these spaces, we'll be reflecting honestly on the land of those places, on the history of that land, of things of which we can celebrate and things of which we can be rightly sorry. Then we're going to look at where we are. We're going to look at changing landscapes. Stuart and I both work in education. Stuart teaches across Taranaki and Waikato for Dairy NZ. And so he also knows what it's like to bring on a new generation in these places. We're going to look at changing employment, changing population, changing opportunities. We're going to look at what we have. We're going to look at the gift of the Spirit, the mind of Christ, who has called us into our communities over generations, and that our churches carry the narrative of these places in communities. And so as I think about the seasons, and I couldn't meet with you without bringing these, there are three things I've brought with me. Where are we? Here we are. The first one, for those of you who recognize this is a yellow notebook. This is something that must not be lost during carving. But it has been replaced by this. Everything that we need is now downloaded. The reports, our herd management, our feed budgeting is all downloaded into this. So we in the rural community are people of change. We have come across change, we respond to change. We dried off in the first week of March this year. We've had a terrible season last season. We're always responding to change, but there are some things that don't change. Here is a wonderful pair of gumboots. They might not have, I've brought them in out of the mud, but they don't change. They come in different sizes because of different shaped feet, but they are gumboots. So the rural community knows about continuity, and we know about change. We know about God's promise of God's mission ahead of us. And as we go around our diocese and we meet with you, we're confident that God will bring to birth from the land, from our people, new life, new opportunities. Kia ora matata.
Kia ora, Sue. Thank you very much. I've got my red bands outside the office door, actually, because it's the only way of getting across the grass from home to here. You can see that I've put my glasses on so that I could actually see that I had clicked the mute off. Thanks, Wendy, for waving like crazy at me. It's a great pleasure to introduce someone who you've come to know and love so well over these many years, and that's Stephen Black, our ministry educator and director of vocations. And Stephen's going to just help us think about our communication, how we keep in touch, how we connect with each other. Kia ora, Stephen.
Kia ora koutou, and good evening to you all, my brothers and sisters in Christ, my friends with so many different responsibilities and so many gifts. I want to begin by acknowledging and congratulating and thanking all of you who contributed so significantly to creating new communities during lockdown, new online communities, new ways of being together. I know that for a number of you, that was an unprecedented ground to break. And you have transformed the spaces that you live in, and you have found new ways of connecting not just with one another, but with God, within an institution which is perhaps not always perfect, but is genuinely up for it. And it does have a number of good things going for it, despite its imperfections. And one of these is the potential to operate as a network. What we know is the number of bonds that we have between individual communities reflects the overall strength. We know that the more connections we have, the stronger we are. Better than that, we know that through our connections, we can achieve a state of synergy, which basically means when we work together, like a scrum, we achieve more than when we work alone. It's a 1 + 1 = 3 effect. And that's very good indeed, because we need every point available. You've heard what Wendy had to say. However, in order to score, we must actually work together. And communication is absolutely fundamental to success. Now, I think we have the practical bases covered. Website, MailChimp, Instagram, Zoom, email, Facebook, YouTube, yes, even a diocesan calendar. What we need, I think, is not more information or more platforms, but greater engagement. We need to shift from presenting information to connecting and transforming, from talking about the values we've described to living out the values that we aspire to. And tonight's meeting is one example of how we are trying to do that. This kind of interaction contributes to the momentum that is building and leads us into the diocesan conference called Foundations, or Tu'a. For the first time, everyone is invited, and not just invited as individuals, but as members of their parish leadership or home group or ministry team, invited to gather where possible and appropriate for hospitality, and the chance to work out what parts to play in this network, to determine how each unit can take advantage of that synergy and enable the mission of God in the local. And that's where you are the experts in your own spaces. And we, together, can resource one another as we build God's kingdom on those strong foundations. Now, to misquote McLuhan, our gatherings will be our message. So stand by for the family or the Diocesan Family Conference in January 2021 as well. The language of evangelism, church growth, testimony, leadership, mentoring, and delegation. Innovation, collaboration, and the next generations must be central if we are to change our trajectory. So you will hear about successful trials like the workshop in the neighbourhood, and you will hear about some spectacular failures. There will be several what we've come to describe as soft launches, and probably plenty of tears before bedtime. But I pray that there will be lots of conversations, lots of laughs, plenty of engagement and friendship as we rebuild together to make our connections work for God. In that new place, people will discover a family of God who are indeed followers of Christ. They will know us because they will see that we are marked by gratitude. They'll see it through our lives together, the way that we praise God, and the clear sense of purpose that we bring to our work in the kingdom. They will see it as we grow as disciples and as we set our hearts and our minds upon growing new disciples. We need to be as relational, as intentional, and as holistic as we can be in order to serve God faithfully. And people will know us by the way they see our transformative communities in action. Those communities where we are part of being transformed, and those communities where we join together to help make a change for social justice, for equality, for the values of the kingdom. We who are many are one body, and each part of the body, every single one of us, has a critical job to do. So may God help each of us to find out who we are and how we work together. Amen.
Thanks very much indeed, Stephen. And thanks also to those of you who know how to use the chat, to Malcolm and Jared and Tiffany and Andrew for trying to draw my attention to the microphone, and a bit cheeky, Wendy, but at least you know how to use chat. Simon, so 15 years ago, Simon began in the back of my garage. Look how far he's come. Welcome to you, Simon. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So I've got two parts to my presentation. The first part's going to be very short and functional, and that's to talk about our arrangements moving towards Synod later this year. And then I'll share my screen. I've got a few slides just to work through around our resourcing and how that relates to the mission priorities. We are actually going to follow the lead of General Synod this year. General Synod are undertaking a one-day virtual synod later in July. So for our diocese this year, we are going to organise a one-day virtual synod that will fall on the Saturday that we had scheduled for our physical synod. We're going to put out all the arrangements for that and work on all of our how do we vote, how do we debate after General Synod, so we can let them trial and make all of the errors and we can learn all that we need to learn, but it's perfectly possible to do. We are going to have to follow the statute though in terms of our deadlines, making sure that we call for bills and motions as we would normally. So the deadline this year for those to be received will be the 18th of August. But because we're aware that a one-day virtual synod will feel very compressed, as a senior leadership team, we are planning to organise 3 regional hui, and when I say regional, across the diocese, to gather and look at some of the key information that we want to share as a synod. We can't make these synod because they won't fall within the deadlines, but we will be getting information out to you about how we want to run these to give everyone an opportunity to engage in deeper debate, but also to reflect our own unique contexts. Some of what we want to talk about moving into synod will reflect our own context, say in Taranaki or in Piako, and we want to give an opportunity for people to gather and talk through those. So it will feel different this year, but it could be an exciting opportunity to try something new, and we will communicate with you all quite in depth so you understand how this will all work. And as I say, we are going to learn from the General Synod experience as we move forward. So that was the kind of practical, functional part of the presentation. What I need to do, if I can actually get my computer to work, is share my screen now. And then I'm just going to run through a few slides with you all. Okay, here we go. All right, just checking everyone's seeing that okay. I'll just put it onto the slide. Right, I actually went back all the way to around 2007 in my preparation for tonight, and I was actually just doing it because I thought it'd be interesting to refresh some of where we started, and then I decided to just throw some of these raw slides up and embellish them because it was quite interesting what I was reading. So bear with me as I whip through these. This is when we were talking about growing the church kind of 13 years ago, and we were talking about changing times. We're still talking about the same changing times that I'm reflecting on the screen now. But we're also talking about some very important things. We said back in 2007, we know that signs, symbols, and traditions that may mean a lot within the church are really hard for outsiders to understand. But yet, so many times we're returning to them, and we're not yet always returning to the fresh expressions and creating them to draw in a new beginning. We know that society's become less religious, but potentially more spiritual. But are we really understanding how we connect to that and accepting that some people don't find that spiritual connection in our traditional churches? We said back in 2007 that we believe in Jesus who lived fully as one of us. So we're called to do the same as a servant people and go to where the people are. Yet so much of our time is spent waiting for people to come to us still. We need to follow Jesus to those on the edge, to the marginalized, truly enter into those people's worlds, even if there's a cost to doing that for us. Sometimes we forget that, I think, as we worry about what we will lose in these challenging times. As we talked about growing the church, we wanted to build a mission-centered, values-based church. And that's really at the core, I think, of the messaging in tonight's presentation. We wanted to serve the community and welcome others. We wanted to prune a little. This is where I'm getting into the resources part of it. Not everything we do, not everything we own is necessary. And as we evolve and move, as we look at our mission and what we're taking on, some things might no longer be things that we need to hold on to. We want to create the space for mission by traveling lighter than we do at the moment. We then looked at how do we start? And one of the key things we said was loving service has to come before worship service. It's a key trait back then. Are we actually achieving that 13 years later? Not sure. We have to allow growth to mature and not constrain it. Yet if we're honest, how many of us have been in conversations that are actually about constraining growth by holding on to who we've been and what we've had? And at the end of a lot of this conversation, I discovered back in 2007, this is where we landed. What is God actually requiring of us? It's to do what is just, to love kindness and to walk humbly with our God. It's not actually complicated. And actually we make it more complicated than it needs to be. And potentially that's because we spend our time and energy looking at preserving buildings that perhaps were a great part of our past, but don't need to be a part of our future. So when we look at resourcing, we need to be open. We need not to throw everything away, but we really need to look with a kind of lens and saying, is this resource well aligned to the mission that we're now setting before us? And if it's not, do we really need to hold on to it? And I just wanted to finish this with a couple of references to Matthew, because I think they reinforce this. The story of Jesus with the rich man asking what he should do. And he told him quite clearly, if you want to be perfect, go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and then come and follow me. Well, I think sometimes we're trying to hold on to our possessions when perhaps we could actually look at letting them go, selling them and being freer, and perhaps following more easily. Last point from me. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be. I wanted to finish with this because I've been part of so many conversations recently that are about moths and rust and the decay of our buildings that we are struggling to respond to. I think we need to go back and just continually challenge ourselves. Are those resources where we should be putting our time and energy? What else can we be doing with our resources? So just my presentation, this is an exciting time for our diocese. We have such a powerful mission. We're all on board with it. The resource part of that can be an equally exciting part of it. There may be some loss and some fear along that journey, but we can open up some really exciting possibilities if we get onto there too. Kia ora.
Thanks very much, Simon. You can see why being part of this team is so invigorating and so inspiring for me. To be part of this diocese has rejuvenated me year by year, and I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for your commitment. We're going to move now to a question and answer or comment opportunity in time, and in the background here of all of this technology has been Kristen. And she's just going to talk now about how you can raise a hand and can join the panel. And then we'll go to a gallery view so you'll see all the members of the panel. And we'll keep our microphones unmuted and engage with you. And then Jacqui will help us conclude with prayer before 8 o'clock.
What's different now? Because Simon showed us something that you were passionate about in 2007. And so what's different now? I see there's a different team, but I want to hear from you. Why is it different now?
I think at every stage and at every point we've sought to be faithful to discerning where God was leading us. I think we responded faithfully at that point, and there were some very significant changes and developments that we engaged in and began. And I think that's the stage in the development. For myself personally, I think one of the big challenges that is really sharply focused for me now is that actually I need to give attention to growing new followers of Jesus. I don't think that we have given as much attention to that as we need to.
Thank you.
Yes, Tim, it's Tim here. I just want to thank you for all that I've heard. The more I hear, the more excited I am. And I think that it is, we do have the fact we acknowledge a church where the generation is just moving on and we're not sort of backfilling. And seeing that we're looking at ways we can change the way we do things, and just accepting I just want to say I was just very excited. I'm not going to reiterate what I've heard, but I'm just very excited by what I hear. I just say thank you very much, and for your work you're doing, and the discussions you're doing together. So thank you. Yep.
Got it, Tim. Thank you. Just want to pick up on something that Andrew has said in the chat about our focus being more than our parish, our traditional parishes. I wonder, Stephen, if you might just talk a little bit about the neighbourhood and perhaps about the workshop and some of the other pioneer ministries that are starting to develop that are quite different from traditional parishes.
So the workshop has come out of the Taranaki environment, and that's being led by Julia Moore-Pilbrow and Lance Pilbrow, and they're creating a space particularly for families, and it's really in the spirit of the intergenerational. Lots of activities, frequently around a meal and with Eucharistic flavour to it, not always, but often. And they're alongside that, they're building strong connections with the Mosaic youth group. So there's a sense of mentoring and future-proofing and really developing people, and particularly young people, not just as disciples, but disciples who will be able to disciple others as well. So we're really excited to see where that's evolving after a couple of years. But in the Waikato, we're doing something which is a little bit different. It's also focused around a meal. It's also intergenerational, but it's a little bit smaller. We've only got about 4 families involved. And what we're finding is those who have gathered around have prioritized some really clear things. On the first night, my wife Mel ran an exercise inviting people to identify what they wanted in their church building and what they wanted outside. And what was fascinating to me was that all of these people who'd grown up as Anglicans, and they now had children and they wanted to come back and re-engage with the faith, but they didn't feel welcome in a traditional Anglican parish. There was no place for them to express themselves or have leadership or even to have their kids without their kids being told off. So what they focused on, here's Lance in the background just correcting some of what I said. Sorry, Lance, still love you. Just didn't get it quite right. What they said was they wanted to be able to gather their 2-year-olds with their grandparents. They wanted to be able to have a Eucharistic fellowship, and they wanted to be able to ask any question they liked. The one thing that everyone put outside their church was judgment, and everyone completed this exercise independently. So from the ages of 11 through to about 45. And this is the space we think we really need to prioritise. The returners, those who have been shaped in the Anglican tradition, who want to be Eucharistic, who want to be able to pray and talk about God's work in their lives, but who can't quite fit into the culture of a church that they left behind.
Thanks, Stephen. I see Jared is online, and Jared and Jess and their family living in Waitara, and just being available to the young people in that town and forging a new way, a different way of being involved in ministry. So our chaplains in our schools and in our hospital and in our tertiary institutions, they're really significant mission initiatives engaging in a way that is outside of our traditional congregational life, but very much part of the ministry and the mission of the diocese. Murray, I think you've raised your hand.
I think the sad thing from what I hear from Stephen is the reaction to those people to the churches. So isn't there a challenge not only to set up separate units outside the church, but also look into the churches about what those people are saying and take up the challenge as well?
Are you inviting me to respond, Murray and Bishop?
What do you think I'm doing?
I can't see your beautiful face, I'm sorry. Look, this has been an issue in the church for a long time. If you look at our stats, we're looking at many generations of young people who haven't found a place. If you listen to the likes of some of our younger leaders, they will talk about the 30 and 40-year-olds who are in the church being asked to disciple and mentor, even although they were never discipled nor mentored themselves. So the kind of change that we're talking about within our parishes, I think, is pretty fundamental. There are some things that we just do brilliantly, and we have some clear strengths inside our churches and in our communities with the social service work that we do. But I've got huge energy for renewing the worshipping life that captures a whole new generation. That means that when our young people come out of our church schools, they actually look to the Anglican Church and find a home where they do have leadership roles and they do have a voice and they're excited about the difference they can make. They've got such a passion and a thirst for social justice issues that they're natural kingdom gospel workers. We're just not making the connection. So yeah, there's the challenge, and if we can do that in our parishes as well, and there's evidence of that, brilliant. But we need to be doing several things in parallel. That's how we test, and that's how we work out what works, and we learn from our failures as well.
And one of the things I'd say when we're looking at working at partnerships, and I was just responding to Wade there in the chat session, is that actually what we're doing is to look to what we've already got, strengthen those relationships, especially with places like Anglican Action, who are just working so tirelessly and doing such great work. You know, how can we as parishes get behind them, but as people of God? And when we're looking at that younger generation, they don't particularly want to join a stuffy a church that is judgmental and not welcoming. What they want is they want a cause in which to live their life for with regards to Jesus. And so we've got to be really clear that what we're offering them is something that's worth committing a lifelong journey to. It's not just about the Sunday experience for them. They want something to get their teeth into around justice. And so utilising Anglican Action, those sorts of things, is going to be so important for us in the future. Kia ora.
We've got a hand raised by 64274. Can't wait to hear who that is.
Oh, kia ora koutou. I don't know why that happened. My name is Sheldon.
Hi there.
Loving this kōrero. I was part of St Mary's just prior to Jamie Allen arriving, and I was also part of Kobe Hart was still with you at the time, and I had was also part of the worship team with her, and listening to this kōrero with Lance in the workshop. There was another service that was held at that time across the road, even though I know you are across the road, in the hall, and it was really wonderful. And hearing every one of you talk very real about people's experience of how we feel coming into, I'll use Wendy's word, stuffy environment, because I come to hear about the Lord. I come to hear about who he is, what he does. And I'm part of that, because the building, as we know, we are that church. We are the church building that house the Holy Spirit. And so I'm just wondering why the Taranaki Cathedral hasn't brought back that service that was held in the other room, and then we all came together for communion, I think it was. Yeah, because I believe the Lord wants me to be a part of the Taranaki Cathedral. I watched the induction of Jay and Jacqui, and I was just blown away by how amazing that whole service was, even though it was virtual. And why I believe it was amazing is because it was the removal of all of the other things that go along with a service. So it was straight from one person to the next to the next. Jacqui, I even sent a comment about how beautiful it actually was because it was personal. There was no interruptions of stand up, sit down. There was somebody else coming in, which leapt into stand, and yeah, I just really wanted to say all these things. And being Māori, I think the timing is right with Jay coming in. No offence to anybody there, but I know that the Lord's called me to be part of the church again. I'm nearly in tears because I think it's right. What he wants me to do in that, I'm not sure. But I look forward to seeing where the cathedral goes from here on.
God bless you heaps. It's be such a blessing for us, for you to be involved again. See that Sue Pickering's got her hand up, and I'm just going to invite Sue to comment or ask her question, and we'll make that the last one just before we wind up and Jacqui helps us pray. Kia ora, Sue. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Thank you, Bishop. Kia ora tātou. I hardly want to say anything really after our last speaker, but these are things that have come to me as I've been listening. The first comment I want to make is around us not being anxious about the timing and how things unfold, because I think that it's taken 30 plus years, for example, to get the hatchments moved at Meritapu. But that only happened when the people were ready, the time was right, and both Māori and Pākehā could come together in a service that was tremendously moving, both emotionally and literally, when the whole congregation passed those memorial paintings hand by hand over to relocate them where they needed to be relocated, so they no longer form the focus and distraction in our worship. And it took a long time. And so we don't need to be worried about how long things are taking, because things happen at the Kairos moment. The second thing I want to comment on is the beautiful synchronicity in Te Whare Hohonga in its design. And I don't know whether this was conscious or a spirit-led beautiful thing, but when you look at Te Whare Hohonga, the design is such that we have the replicated diagonal diamond-shaped windows, the same as the hatchments, but this time they let in the light. And this is the most beautiful thing. I'd love to know whether anybody actually made that connection as they designed it, but it struck me as I saw the design come up, that from within that building there will be light coming in through exactly the same shaped space.
That's cool.
The third thing is, I'm sorry I can't remember which of you spoke about spiritual experience, but it's certainly been clear for a long time that people have a connection. Research began in this area seriously around the 1960s by a scientist, Alistair Hardy, who asked for people to tell him about their experience of something other, whether they called it God or not. And he initially asked churchgoers, and sadly didn't get as much response as he had hoped at that time. However, he opened the question more widely and received thousands of responses from people who had had an encounter with something other. And research right through even until in the last 2 or 3 years, globally, not just in one location, have reinforced the reality that at least half the people we come across will have had an experience of something other, whether they call it God or not. And I think it's important for us to be prepared to have those conversations with the expectation that somehow God will have been at work, even if it is just to make them feel, oh, there's something going on here I don't quite understand. Or they've noticed an answer to prayer, or something funny's happened when grandma died. I felt this sort of lifting. You know, those sort of things are entryways into a discussion which may lead on. They're the seeds. So I've said probably a bit more than I intended to, but I'm just so extremely hopeful and excited. And like the most recent speaker, I'm sure that the Spirit has brought all of you together and is bringing us into this place of launching now. I'm really excited. So bless you all. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Sue. Thank you. Look, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We hope to do these regularly. We want to just keep building the relationships. As both Sue and Wendy said when they were speaking about the urban and rural contexts, the really key thing for us moving forward is that we begin by listening and by moving around our communities of all sorts, deepening our understanding and awareness and finding together the direction that God is leading us into. So Jacqui, thank you very much for preparing our prayers to conclude with, and I hope that every one of you is profoundly blessed and that you have a peaceful and restful night. Thank you.
Let us pray. Spirit of love, who moves with creation, drawing the threads of life into life, you knit our true reason for being. Come, work with us and weave us into one, marked by gratitude, growing as disciples, transforming communities. We know that there are many times when we have frayed the fabric of your making, tearing away from all that you intend. Yet, to be whole, humanity is aching. Come, work with us and weave us into one, marked by gratitude, growing as disciples, transforming communities. Great loom of God, where history is woven, you are the frame that holds us to the truth. Jesus is the theme, the pattern you have given. Come, work with us through partnership and reconciliation, peace and justice, mission in urban and rural communities, connecting, resourcing, and weave us into one, marked by gratitude, growing as disciples, transforming communities, moving forward together. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Thank you, Jacqui. Thank you, everyone. Look, a big shout out to Maya Lander, who did all the graphics in the presentation tonight. Pretty talented, eh? Thanks, everyone. Bless you heaps. Good night.